All right, we have a bunch of folks rolling in now, and so let's get the party started. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is George Costandi, and I will be the moderator today. I wanted to just go through some quick information with you. I'm super excited about this presentation. This is actually the second time we run this presentation. The first time we had a huge turnout, and it was amongst the highest performing webinars we've ever done. People absolutely loved it, and it's obviously on personal injuries. So just wanted to go through some quick information first here. We're going to be doing a live Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to submit your questions via the text box here in the webinar screen. We're going to try to get to as many questions as possible within the hour. If we don't get to your questions during the webinar, we promise to follow up with you after the fact and make sure that your questions are answered. All questions are going to be answered anonymously, and the webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website, on LinkedIn and YouTube pages, so you can, of course, pass that on to your colleagues if you want after the fact. We'll be sending each of you a completion certificate by way of email. That email will probably go out next week. So just, if you don't mind being patient with us, we make these certificates and email them individually. It's a very manual process, so we appreciate your patience. And if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, you can reach out to my team at marketing@origin-and-com.com. It says here webinar, but if you don't mind emailing marketing, that'd be great. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to introduce you to our presenter. We have Dino Mattei joining us today. He specializes in metallurgical materials and mechanical failure analysis. He has over 20 years of experience. He's completed over 2,000 forensic investigations of various metallic and non-metallic components, and he has been qualified in court as an expert witness. We thank you so much, Dino, for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar. It will be my pleasure to present a very interesting topic to you. It's an interesting topic, but it's also a sad topic because in those cases, the person suffers injury or permanent disability or even death. Personal injuries investigations are the most diverse types of claims and very, very challenging. They are not two alike. Each new personal injury investigation is different than the previous one and is different than the following one. Unfortunately, personal injuries do happen, and they are commonly caused by user error or negligence, manufacturing design issues, manufacturing defects, poor maintenance of tools or equipment, or installation error. In order to run a successful personal injury investigation, my advice would be to document the evidence, preserve the evidence, and take statements as soon as practically possible. People are changing their stories all the time, so the sooner you get the statement, the better, and the data might be more accurate if you're rather than taking the statement later. A forensic engineer can always assist you in a personal injury claim. And what we do when we are retained for such an investigation is we gather and analyze all the available data. We try to get as much background information as possible. We conduct examinations, first non-destructive, and if there are multiple parties involved, then we organize joint examinations based on a prepared testing protocol. We analyze the results of the examinations If there is an opposing expert report, we review it and we make suggestions for further work. We separate facts from opinions. We are unbiased, and although we are sympathetic, we are not biased by any of the parties. We have lengthy discussions with adjusters, lawyers, to discuss which would be the best course of action, and we help the adjuster or the lawyer to expose liable parties and to formulate a sound strategy in administering the claim. Throughout the years, Origin and Cause was involved in numerous cases associated with personal injuries, and I'm going through a few examples here. Bearing axles, drive shaft, wheels. These are all automotive components, and their failure caused personal injuries. Conveyor belts caused broken arms, wind turbines that fell on top of people, solar panels likewise, hoist and lifting devices or elevators that failed and caused personal injuries. You will be surprised to hear that tarps can also cause personal injuries if they are not properly processed. Food processing equipment can also cause personal injuries. We have seen a lot of personal injuries associated with tools, rental tools especially, grinders, saws, rototillers, ladders, roof anchors, and a very interesting one was a commercial paper cutter. We have seen personal injuries associated with entertaining, sports, and stage equipment like bikes, fitness equipment, skiing equipment, playground equipment, trampolines, paddle boards, and the collapse of a video wall. We have investigated product contamination, foreign particles in bottled water, aftershave, which was contaminated, causing severe burns to the face of the person, and chocolate contamination. Other interesting ones are explosion of a pizza oven, finger cut due to a paint can handle, electrocution because of a hair dryer. We have seen injuries as the result of structural damage, like the collapse of patios or umbrellas. We have seen personal injuries associated with stairs and guardrails, medical equipment and accessories, chairs, wheelchairs, walkers, doors. We have been involved in personal injuries associated with scalding, and one of my colleagues was involved in carbon monoxide poisoning. In the next minutes, I'm going to go through a few interesting cases that I selected, and I hope you'll enjoy these cases. The first one involves an electrical wheelchair. The gentleman was riding the wheelchair on the street, and all of a sudden he lost control. The joystick that controlled the wheelchair did not work properly, and he fell off the curb. The wheelchair was provided to us for examination, and in testing it, we found nothing wrong with the motor, that the wheelchair worked as intended. Upon further investigation, we discovered that the wheelchair was driven on the day of the incident near a radio station. So radio station interfere with the functionality of the motor. However, this was not the main cause of the failure. The failure was caused by the fact that the joystick was not responding. So the rider noticed that something's wrong with the wheelchair. It's not behaving as it used to, and he tried to stop it. However, he was left with the joystick in his hand. And the reason was because of a poor design. And you can see the joystick was not secured in place by anything. There is no glue or not set screw, nothing. So in panic, the rider lifted the joystick and the accident happened. The next case involves a ceramic toilet. Without a warning, a piece of the bowl fractured and damaged the artery of a young child. This is a small child toilet which was in a daycare. The toilet was installed for several years, and as I said, the incident happened without a warning. There was no evidence that the child might have hit the toilet. There was no evidence of mechanical damage. The piece of the bowl just fractured by itself, if I can say that. And our investigation revealed the fact that this was possible due to a manufacturing defect, the presence of internal stresses. It might sound weird, but those ceramic materials can contain internal stresses which lay hidden for years before they are released without a specific reason. There are certain tests and analyses that can be conducted to show that ceramic materials have internal stresses. We did not find any evidence of impact or something to show that an external source caused the toilet to break. The next case involves a chair with welded frame. These chairs were installed in some companies' offices throughout Canada. It was a travel agency. So one day, a parent with his child was sitting on the chair and having a discussion with a customer representative. All of a sudden, the chair broke and the child, which he kept on his shoulder, fell head first on the floor, and he suffered severe injuries. As you can see in the second image, it was the weld that fractured. The chair and a few exemplar ones that did not fail were provided to us for examination. And for the examination, we used the stereo microscope and one of the most important tools in failure analysis, scanning electron microscope. Scanning electron microscope, it's a microscope that can provide images of magnifications to hundreds of thousands of times. We don't need to go that high, but we need to go 300, 400,000 times. So we can see features that cannot be seen by the naked eye or under the stereo microscope. These two images might not tell too much for you, but they are relevant images obtained under the scanning electron microscope and shows large porosity in the weld and inclusions. All these are considered deficiencies and they have a negative effect on the load carrying capability of the weld. So because the load carrying capability was reduced, the weld was no longer performing as intended and it failed, resulting in the injury of that child. The next case is associated with an accident involving fatality. This was a full frontal collision between a vehicle and two bikers. One of the bikers died as the result of the accident. So a lawsuit was launched and the family of the driver wanted to know whether the accident was caused by a possible manufacturing deficiency. So it was the tie rod. Tie rod is a very important piece of equipment in a vehicle because it connects the steering wheel with the wheel. So the tie rod broke, as you can see on the right side, the image. And again, we took it under the scanning electron microscope and we looked at the fracture surface. It must be told that fracture surfaces are actually telltale stories. They contain, if properly preserved, they contain features which are indicating what was the failure mode. In this particular case, these images are taken at 500 times magnification. Those features that you see here are so-called dimples, and they are always associated with a ductile failure. In other words, the tie rod was overloaded. Although it might sound weird, in material science, oftentimes we say the material failed as intended. The materials are designed to withstand a certain stress, but after that stress is exceeded, the material will fail, and it will fail in a ductile manner. So in this particular instance, because the tie rod failed as a result of ductile overload, it was concluded that it failed after the accident and it was not the cause of the accident. As I mentioned, every fracture surface, if properly preserved, tells the story. I would like to show you here how the fracture surface would have looked like under the scanning electron microscope if the failure would have been the result of fatigue. Fatigue could have been the result of manufacturing deficiency, intergranular fracture, or fracture around the grain boundaries. This would also indicate possible manufacturing deficiency, or transgranular fracture, which would indicate some sort of corrosion. It must be said that every material is made out of grains, and the fracture can go through the grains or around the grains. That's why the difference between intergranular and transgranular fracture. The next case involves a personal injury which occurred as the result of a bike frame failure. As you can see on the right side image, it was the main frame that broke at the weld. Like in other cases where there are multiple parties involved, we organized the joint destructive examinations. We prepared the testing protocol, which was discussed with all the parties in advance, and we accepted suggestions or modifications if they were reasonable. In order to examine a fracture surface, oftentimes you have to cut that evidence in smaller pieces for easy handling in order to fit under the microscopes. So in this particular case, like in the tie rod before, we cut the section containing the weld and we took it for examination in the lab. On the left side the image, you will see the overall view of the fractured weld. And on the right side image, again, our friend, the scanning electron microscope, provided significant evidence to show that the failure was the result of fatigue. The features that indicated fatigue are so-called striations, and there's parallel lines which are indicating the fracture progression. This case, it's a very interesting one, and long story short is a gentleman was recycling truck rims. So he was going on various sites and he was collecting truck rims in order to recycle the rims. Most of these tire rims were still having the tires attached to them. So in order to get to the rim, this gentleman had to cut the rubber and get to the rim, which was again cut in 4 pieces for easy handling. However, during cutting, the saw he was using cut back, causing him face injuries. He suspected that the owner of those tires put some explosives inside the tires. So that was his allegation. However, our investigation revealed the fact that he was negligent in cutting those tires, and when he cut through soft material, he used a certain speed, but when he reached the actual rim itself, because it was harder, the saw cut back, hurting him. There was no evidence inside of any explosives. This case, it's not actually a personal injury, but it's very interesting, and it actually chocolate contamination. A reputable chocolate maker started to receive complaints from the clients about the bad taste of the chocolate. So they didn't know what to do. They did not change things in their production. And the only thing that was actually changed was at one of their suppliers, who switched the material they used to make the window for the box. On the left side, you will see a chocolate box, and you can see that it is provided with a window. The box is cardboard, and the window is made of cellophane. This is glued to the cardboard using a special glue, because this is a product for, it's considered food product. It needs to meet certain standards. You cannot use whatever glue you want. You have to use a which is certified for food production. So unbeknownst to the chocolate maker, the provider of the boxes changed the glue they used to attach the window. And you probably don't know, but chocolate is one of the biggest odor absorbent compounds in the world. If you place a chocolate and an onion side by side in the fridge, the next morning the chocolate will taste like onion. So in this particular case, the non-certified glue was used, and the chocolate absorbed the odor, giving it a bad taste. Nobody got hurt except us, who received about 30 boxes of chocolate for trying. The next case, it's about a walker. There are way too many personal injuries associated with the use of walkers. Sometimes the walkers are not properly maintained, but sometimes they're not properly made, like this particular one. It is the frame that broke, and as you can see on the right side image, and in this close-up, there was large voids and pores within the material, which reduced its load-carrying capability. In this case, it was a roofer who fell backwards while using the ladder, and he remained paralyzed from waist down as a result of the accident. The accident happened as the result of the hinge that broke. You can see it on the right side image, the broken hinge. This is an aluminum ladder. It's a professional grade ladder used by roofers. However, somehow the hinge ruptured. We were retained to provide an investigation. We put the parties together. We provided a testing protocol, and we conducted a joint destructive examination. That hinge was cut in smaller pieces to fit under the microscope. And again, we took it under the scanning electron microscope to see the features on the fracture surface. And as you can see here, there are a lot there is a lot of porosity in that hinge. So that hinge load carrying capability was drastically reduced by manufacturing deficiencies. So at the end of the day, it was determined that it was the foundry that casts that hinge responsible for the incident. This steel cable that you see on the left side image was associated with heavy lifting fitness equipment. And a gentleman using the equipment got hurt when the steel cable broke. As you can see on the left side image, it broke. Again, we put the parties together and we organized the joint destructive examination. And again, we took the fracture surface to be analyzed under a scanning electron microscope. And you can see on the right side image, these are the features that we observed. And for a materials engineer, these features are typical for ductile overload. They are called cup and cone, and they are indicating overload. So as I mentioned earlier, it might sound weird to you, but the material failed as intended. Upon further investigation, it was discovered that the user overloaded the equipment beyond its lifting capability, causing the cable to break. It was nothing wrong with the cable. Personal injuries can happen in the kitchen as well. And in this particular case, we were asked to determine what could have caused this pot to spew molten metal. This is a cladded pot, copper, aluminum, copper. So the bottom is cladded and it's made like a sandwich from 3 layers, aluminum and copper. The story behind this incident is that the owner wanted to boil some eggs and he put some water and then he went to answer a call and she completely forgot about the pot. So the water eventually evaporated, the pot overheated, and because the aluminum has the lowest melting point at 660 Celsius, it melted and it started to spew molten pieces of material throughout the kitchen, causing burns. As I mentioned earlier in my presentation, each personal injury is different. None of them are alike, and they are so unexpected. In this particular case, it was a dentist chair lamp that broke. It fell onto the top of the head of the patient, causing her severe head injuries. We attended the site, we documented the evidence, we retrieved the evidence, and then we conducted further examination. And our conclusion was that it was a hinge in the chair lamp that failed as the result of fatigue. This was the result of actually wear and tear rather than a manufacturing deficiency. The lamp was 20+ years old and it was beyond its life expectancy. At Origin and Cause, we have a department who can investigate personal injuries associated with carbon monoxide poisoning, and these possible incidents include but are not limited to improper gas appliances installation, lack of gas appliances maintenance inspection, defective gas appliances, blocked chimney flutes, or vehicles exhausts. We are also investigating personal injuries resulting of structures collapse, and those incidents are not limited to the use of unauthorized structures or additions to building structures of collapse of structures. I mentioned in one of my early slides some examples of numerous cases that we were involved in. I would like to present some more, but I don't want to take too much of your time. So I end my presentation here, and I'll be more than happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Dinu. Really appreciate it. So folks, if you don't mind just going to your GoToWebinar console there on your screen and clicking questions, the questions tab, you can input any questions that you have. I've got a few already, and I'll tell you, Dinu has done multiple presentations where I've participated in, and he kind of talks about the various types of claims he sees. And Dinu, like it's amazing the variation of claims you see and the types of failures. It's really so diverse. It doesn't seem like you have a boring day at the office ever, because it's crazy what you see. Thank you for sharing all this stuff with us. So I have a few questions here. With regards to the electric wheelchair, how did you know that there was an interference with a radio show?
That's a very good question.
Just remind us, it was the one, the electric wheelchair that someone was driving, and you had indicated that there was some interference with a radio show, and then they lost control. Okay.
So there was nothing wrong with the wheelchair other than the design deficiency of the joystick. The motor was running okay. The amperage was okay. And as I mentioned, we did some research about the location of the accident, and it was very close to a radio station. And after we did some research, we found out that it's very possible that radio stations can interfere with electrical motors. And although we were not able to duplicate the incident, this was the most plausible cause. So that particular case was a combination of two factors, interference from the radio station and the design deficiency.
Okay, and then the next question there is, was the joystick manufactured just to sit in the socket, or was there an alternate mechanism to hold it in place?
No, that was the problem. Actually, there was nothing to hold the handle in place. It should have been provided with set screw, or it should have been glued into place. There was nothing to prevent it from coming out.
So interesting. Okay, next question. With regards to the toilet, so who was liable for the incident?
The manufacturer of the toilet.
Okay, can you explain why that is?
Yes, so these toilets are made from clay, and they are put in a furnace where they are sintered to become solid. And if either the heating or the cooling, most likely the cooling, is not proper, then you will have internal stresses. So in other words, one section of the part is more stressed than the other. So they will push against each other. So the material is not uniform. There are internal stresses. And although it's not fully explained scientifically, those internal stresses can lay hidden inside the product for years before they are released without an external factor. It is very known in the industry that a bunch of toilets made by a certain manufacturer were prone to failure due to the presence of those internal stresses. Also, they are ceramic materials. They are not impervious to water. They absorb water. And if the porosity is higher than what the standard stipulates, then we will have a problem. And again, this would be a manufacturing deficiency. And this can be determined by running some tests. They are not the cheapest, and they are actually dangerous, and there are only a few places where can they be run. But they show without a reason of a doubt the presence of a manufacturing deficiency. And again, to answer the question, the manufacturer was liable for providing a defective product.
Okay. Next question. With regards to the wear and tear that you guys had determined in the dentist chair, so is that, sorry, it says, was dentist determined to be liable?
Oftentimes we don't know the outcome of our investigations, to be honest, and I really don't know. I don't have an answer to this question, I'm afraid.
Okay. So that's actually worth pointing out here, is that your job, correct me if I'm wrong, Dinu, you are kind of not involved in determining liability. You are involved exclusively in analyzing the physical evidence and rendering an opinion on the cause of the failure. Is that correct?
Yes, we are doing the engineering work on these investigations. We are not providing legal advice. And unless the matter goes to court, oftentimes we don't know about the outcome.
Yes. Okay, so liability, determining liability, or at least pointing potential liable parties, that you're defining that as a legal task rather than an engineering task. Is that correct?
Yes, but to be fair, we discuss with our clients, right? So oftentimes we're asked, without pointing fingers and without providing names, which party do you think had a contribution to this particular incident? And I'm not talking only about personal injuries, I'm talking about other investigations as well. So we are helping the client to make a decision. We are not making decisions, we are just helping making them a decision.
Yes. Okay, so you would essentially identify potential interested parties, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Cool. All right, next question here. Are cases that involve defective products reported to Health Canada or Transport Canada so that recalls or other corrective action can be taken on any remaining products?
It was not a personal injury, it was a fire involving a dryer where one of my colleagues reported it to Health Canada. And in the welded chair failure that I mentioned earlier, it was not reported to Health Canada because those chairs were made for that particular client. But as the result of our investigation, they, for the lack of a better term, they recalled 800 chairs from across Canada and they replaced them.
Okay.
Now, we have the duty as professional engineer to inform the public and keep the public safe.
Yes. Okay. Do you have any experience with vehicle airbags, particularly the knee airbags?
No, I'm afraid I do not.
Okay. And is that something that, say you were to receive a claim, a bodily injury claim with some sort of injuries that relate to airbags.
If there is a component from the airbag that failed, I can look under the microscope and tell you exactly why it failed. I can do that.
So,
but overall, I do not have specific experience with airbags.
Okay, but the airbags have shared components, right? Like electrical
Yes.
components, mechanical components that you would be qualified to review and determine their functionality. Is that accurate?
I can definitely look at the mechanical components. The electrical ones would need to be looked after by an electrical engineer, but on the mechanical ones, definitely I can look.
Cool. Okay, great. Thank you. Another question. What is an example of a claim involving a tarp?
Actually, there were several. People were putting the tarps over hay or over a building under construction. And they overstretch those tarps, and there are those rings on the edge that are used to secure the tarp. So those rings separated and pierced someone's eye.
Did what? They did what?
Pierced someone's eye.
Oh, pierced. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So from incidents that you've seen that relate to tarps, one of the incidents would have been relating to the metal rings. How about the actual tarps? Have you encountered anything with specifically the tarp?
Interesting enough, these tarps have several grades, right? So a certain tarp, which is designed for, let's say, cover your pool, it's probably not designed to cover the hay. It's the thickness of the material, is the material of the grommets. Those rings are called grommets. And there's certain other parameters that differentiate the two. And one thing is to use a tarp that you can buy from a dollar store, and another thing is to buy a tarp from a professional supplier. It's a huge difference in the quality of the material.
Okay. Next question. What is the approximate split between manufacturing defects and wear and tear? If you were to ballpark it.
I'm afraid there's no answer to this question. Each case is different.
Would you say, in your career, spending over 20 years, if you were to put a figure to it, is there a high percentage of losses that you've investigated that were a result of manufacturing defects? Like, is it a considerable percentage or majority percentage, or is it wear and tear?
Again, this is a question that cannot be answered exactly. However, based on my experience, I was involved in more cases associated with manufacturing deficiencies rather than wear and tear.
Okay, yes. Yeah, so you're distinguishing, you don't know the general statistic, but in your personal experience on your desk,
yeah,
you typically will see more manufacturing defect claims rather than ones that resulted from wear and tear.
Well, keep in mind that for wear and tear, it takes years for this to occur, and oftentimes there's not even a claim open, right? Mm-hmm. So the client decides, okay, it's 20 years old, pump, wear and tear.
Yeah. Okay. Are you able to provide copies of the slides and send it to us? We typically would send a copy of the recording of this webinar, and we would send that to you by email, which obviously would have the slides. Next question, do you ever have to view the injuries in order to better understand why something failed?
Sorry, can you ask me again?
Do you ever have to view the injuries in order to better understand why something failed?
Oh God, no. One of my parents was a pathologist, and I watched too many things when I was a kid. I cannot watch injuries. Sorry.
But no, but would say, for example, a bruise on the right hip, for example, have helped your investigation, say in the wheelchair, or like, you know, the travel agency chair that failed? Like, would understanding the injuries assist you in your investigation in any way?
This is actually a very good question, and I think it depends, and it's on a case to case. In some instances, it might help to know where the injury occurred, while in other instances, it's not necessarily. I'll give you an example. I was involved in a rototiller failure, right? The gentleman had one of the tines of the rototiller in his thigh. And it was important to know where the tine ended, because based on that condition, we determined that actually he was operating the rototiller backwards, which was against the manufacturer recommendation. So he operated the rototiller backwards, and he fell backwards, and the rototiller went over onto him. So in that particular case, it was important to know where the tine ended up. However, in the case of the welded chair, it was not relevant to my investigation on how the poor child hit the floor. He hit it head first, and we know the chair broke, but we did not need to know more details about this. So again, it depends from a case to case.
Yes. And would you typically request, like, you know, we've got a captive crowd here, you know, if they're sending you a new claim, would you ask them to exclude the injury information, so that it, you know, you're just looking at technical facts, or do you not mind that would be included?
As I answered before, it depends from a case to case. Oftentimes, it's important to know. Going back to that full frontal accident, it did not, I would not say there, it was not relevant to the investigation.
Yes.
How the biker was hit. But again, coming back to the rototiller case, it was important to know where the injury occurred. I would not affect any investigation by refusing to review certain information. Usually we don't review medical reports. It's not our competence. But as I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's important to know if the injury was on the left or on the right side. I hope this answered the question.
Yeah, really great question. Next question. Any suggestions on what type of information we can gather as part of the investigation that would make it easier for an expert once assigned?
First of all, get as much background information as possible. If there is a piece of equipment, get the history, the maintenance, make sure the evidence is preserved, is documented, make sure it's not altered, and get the statements from the involved parties as soon as practically possible, because people are changing their stories quite often. And I've seen that numerous times when personal injuries are involved. So in the initial stage, the injured person is more willing to provide a relative accurate overview of what happened, because later on, after they got in touch with friends, with lawyers, with other parties, they might change their stories. They might get scared. So that would make an investigation more difficult. So the sooner you can get the statements, the better.
Excellent. Great. So that is actually the last of the questions. We've got a few minutes to spare. We thank you all for joining us today, and thank you so much, Dinu, for your presentation. Folks, you have Dinu's contact information there. Please feel free to reach out to him. He's always very quick to respond. And if you have any questions or comments or anything, you could also reach out to me, gcastandi@origin-and-cause.com. You will be receiving a completion certificate, as mentioned before, most probably before next Friday. So please be patient with us. We'll get those to you. And please be safe. Everyone, have a great day.